It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November, and I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, staring at a half-empty jar of coffee on the counter. The house was completely silent. It is a very specific kind of silence that you only truly notice when you live alone in a sprawling American suburb. There were no cars driving by outside. The neighbors were all at work, their garage doors shut tight. The television was off. All I could hear was the low, steady, mechanical hum of the refrigerator. I was 62 years old, and as I stood there in the quiet, a terrifying realization washed over me. I suddenly realized that this silent kitchen, this quiet house, and this profound, heavy isolation was going to be the entirety of my world for the next 20 years. I had spent almost 4 decades working in middle management for a regional logistics company. I wasn't wealthy, but I had always been responsible. I paid my mortgage on time, I contributed what I could to a small 401k, and I followed all the rules that society tells you to follow to guarantee a safe, comfortable retirement. But life rarely adheres to the plans we make in our 30s. When the company downsized, my position was eliminated. At 62, you find yourself existing in this strange, terrifying purgatory. You are entirely too young to qualify for Medicare, and drawing your Social Security early means taking a permanent, massive reduction in your monthly check for the rest of your life. But at the same time, you are often seen as too old by the corporate world to simply start over and rebuild a career. I remember sitting at my dining room table that same evening, surrounded by a scattered pile of paperwork. There were utility bills, rising property tax assessments, and medical insurance premiums. I had a calculator in my hand and I was desperately trying to make the math work. But the math simply did not work. If I took my early Social Security draw and combined it with small, careful withdrawals from my modest savings, I was looking at trying to survive on roughly $1,800 a month. In America, trying to live an independent life on $1,800 a month feels less like retirement and more like a slow, suffocating financial trap. Property taxes and basic maintenance on my aging house were eating up over $400 a month. Health insurance premiums, because I had to bridge the gap until I turned 65, were a massive, painful expense. Then there was the utility bill, the car insurance, the gas, and the groceries. Every single trip to the supermarket was an exercise in anxiety. I found myself putting items back on the shelves. I turned the thermostat down until the house was uncomfortable, just to save a few dollars on heating. I stopped going to restaurants. I stopped going to the movies. I stopped doing anything that required spending money. I was retreating inward financially and socially, shrinking my life down to fit a budget that was completely out of touch with the modern cost of living. But the lack of money wasn't even the most painful part of the experience. The truly devastating part was the sudden, absolute invisibility. In America, our worth is so deeply and intrinsically tied to our economic output and our productivity. When you stop working, and especially when you stop spending money, you simply cease to exist in the eyes of society. Our suburbs are designed for privacy, which is wonderful when you are raising a busy family, but it becomes a prison when you are older and alone. I would go entire weekends where the only human voice I heard was the cashier at the grocery store, and even that was just a fleeting transactional exchange. I was 62 years old, physically healthy, and mentally sharp, but I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I realized that I had worked 40 years to achieve a retirement that consisted entirely of surviving in a silent house, waiting for the days to pass. One night, unable to sleep, I was sitting in the dark glow of my computer screen, falling down a rabbit hole on the internet. I was searching for alternative ways to live, searching for places where people with small pensions could stretch their dollars. That was when I first started reading about Southeast Asia, and specifically, about Vietnam. At first, the numbers seemed completely fictional to me. I had lived my entire life conditioned to American prices. I found cost of living databases stating that a single person's monthly costs in Vietnam are about $429 before housing. I literally could not comprehend that number. I kept digging, focusing on a coastal city right in the middle of the country called Da Nang. It looked beautiful, long stretches of beach, lush green mountains, and a thriving local culture. I read that a fully furnished one-bedroom apartment outside the city center could cost as little as $250 to $320 a month. The more I read, the more an incredibly reckless, terrifying idea began to take root in my mind. I watched videos of expats my age walking through vibrant, bustling street markets. I saw them sitting in open-air cafes, drinking strong Vietnamese coffee, laughing with locals and other foreigners. They didn't look isolated. They didn't look like they were carrying the crushing weight of financial terror on their shoulders. They looked relaxed, they looked engaged with the world, they looked like they were actually living. My biggest fear wasn't the logistics of the move. My biggest fear was the unknown. I thought to myself, how could I possibly move to a country where I do not speak a single word of the language? How could I navigate a completely foreign healthcare system? What if I got there and realized it was a massive mistake, and I had already sold my only safety net? It felt like emotional and financial suicide. I almost closed my laptop and gave up on the idea entirely. But then I looked around my silent living room. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the fact that I had not had a meaningful, deep conversation with another human being in nearly a month. I realized that my fear of the unknown was keeping me anchored to a life that was already breaking my spirit. I was already as lonely as a person could possibly be. What did I actually have to lose? If you are watching this video right now, and you are sitting in a quiet house, feeling that exact same heavy, suffocating ache of isolation and financial pressure, I want you to stop and listen to me. I see you. I was exactly where you are right now. You are not trapped, and you do not have to accept a declining, invisible quality of life simply because society has forgotten about you. If sharing my journey helps even one of you realize that there is still time to completely rewrite your story, then making this video is worth every second. Please consider subscribing to the channel. We are building a community of people who refuse to give up on their golden years, and we would absolutely love to have you navigate this journey with us. Selling my life took less than 2 months. The house, the furniture, the car, it all went. I packed everything I truly cared about into 2 large suitcases and a single backpack. When the plane finally lifted off the runway, leaving the United States behind, I felt an overwhelming cocktail of sheer panic and profound, terrifying freedom. The 24 hours of travel broke me down physically and mentally. When I finally walked out of the airport in Da Nang, the culture shock hit me like a physical blow. The heat was incredibly intense, a thick tropical blanket of humidity that instantly wrapped around my shoulders. The noise was deafening. There were thousands of motorbikes weaving chaotically through the streets, horns beeping constantly, neon signs glowing in an alphabet I couldn't read, and the rich, complex smells of exhaust, roasting meat, and damp earth filling the air. I took a taxi to a cheap, temporary hotel room I had booked for my first week. When I locked the door behind me, I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, completely overwhelmed. I was 8,000 miles from everything familiar. I was 62 years old, completely alone, and I was terrified that I had just made the most irreversible, catastrophic mistake of my life. For those first few days I hid in that hotel room. I only ventured out to buy bottled water and convenience store snacks, keeping my head down, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the foreign world outside my window. But you cannot hide forever, and eventually, the country forces you to engage with it. During my second week, I decided I had to brave a local outdoor market to buy some actual fresh food. I mapped out the route on my phone, took a deep breath, and walked out into the chaotic streets. The market was a labyrinth of narrow aisles, brightly colored tarps, and absolute sensory overload. Women were sitting on low plastic stools, loudly negotiating prices over massive piles of fresh greens, exotic fruits, and cuts of meat. I was trying to navigate through the crowded pathways, feeling entirely out of place, when the sky suddenly darkened. Without any warning, a torrential, blinding tropical downpour unleashed over the city. Within seconds, the narrow aisles of the market flooded with warm water. I was completely soaked, disoriented, and a wave of pure frustration and homesickness hit me so hard I wanted to cry. I stood there in the pouring rain, feeling foolish and old, when an elderly Vietnamese woman, whose face was lined with decades of deep wrinkles, aggressively waved at me from under the dry canvas awning of her small fruit stall. She didn't speak a word of English. She just pointed at a small blue plastic stool next to her and gestured for me to sit down out of the rain. I carefully stepped under the awning and sat on the tiny stool, my knees practically touching my chest. She looked at me, completely drenched, and burst into a warm, genuine laugh. She reached behind her counter, grabbed a small, incredibly ripe mango, quickly peeled it with a paring knife, and handed it to me. I tried to pull out my wallet to pay her, but she aggressively shook her head, pushed my hand away, and smiled, revealing a row of uneven teeth. We sat there for 20 minutes, watching the rain hammer the pavement. We couldn't exchange a single spoken word, but she kept pointing at the rain, shrugging and smiling, and I found myself smiling back. And as I sat there, eating the sweetest piece of fruit I had ever tasted in my life, a profound realization washed over me. I wasn't invisible anymore. In America, if you get caught in the rain, people rush past you to get to their cars. They don't want to intrude, and they don't want to be delayed. But here, the culture is fundamentally built on shared humanity and community. This woman didn't see an inconvenience. She saw a neighbor who needed a dry place to sit. That simple, beautiful act of hospitality broke the spell of my fear. It shifted my entire perspective. I realized that the isolation I was so terrified of experiencing in a foreign country didn't actually exist here. The only isolation I was facing was the isolation I had brought with me in my own mind. That was the turning point. I stopped trying to force Vietnam to operate like the United States, and I started letting the culture embrace me on its own terms. I found a local real estate agent, and within a week, I moved out of the hotel and into my permanent home. Let me walk you through exactly what my financial reality looks like today, because I know that is the primary source of anxiety for so many of you. My apartment is a bright, modern, spacious one-bedroom unit located in a quiet neighborhood just a 15-minute walk from the beach. It has a beautiful balcony where I drink my coffee every morning, a modern kitchen, and incredibly fast internet. I pay roughly $350 a month for rent. The day-to-day carrying costs of living here are almost difficult to believe. My utilities are remarkably manageable. My electricity bill, even with light air conditioning use for a few hours a day to take the edge off the afternoon heat, consistently runs between $40 and $60 a month. My high-speed fiber optic internet, which is more reliable than what I had in the States, is just another $10 to $15 a month. But the biggest transformation has been my relationship with food. Back home, grocery shopping was a source of constant stress. Here, it is an absolute joy. Local meals are incredibly affordable, with authentic, delicious street food often costing under $5 USD per meal. I regularly walk down to the corner and buy a hearty, steaming bowl of pho or a fresh, crispy banh mi sandwich for just a few dollars, making my overall food budget shockingly low. When I do decide to buy groceries and cook at home, the prices are a fraction of what I was used to. A pound of fresh chicken costs around $3.69, and a loaf of bread is roughly 92 cents. If I ever feel a deep craving for a taste of home, there are plenty of places to find it. Da Nang has a thriving expat scene, and a mid-range Western restaurant meal might cost me $8 to $15. But to be completely honest with you, I mostly stick to the local Vietnamese diet. It is significantly healthier, it utilizes incredibly fresh ingredients, and it keeps my budget tightly managed. Overall, my entire monthly expenditure, including rent, utilities, eating out, groceries, and occasional entertainment, rarely exceeds $1,200. I am living comfortably, beautifully, and with absolute dignity, for less than what I used to pay just for rent and property taxes in America. And the healthcare, which is the massive, looming fear for every American retiree, has been a revelation. I purchased a comprehensive international health insurance policy for a very reasonable monthly premium. When I needed to see a doctor for a minor respiratory issue a few months ago, I went to a pristine, state-of-the-art international hospital in the city. The staff spoke perfect English, I saw a specialist within 20 minutes of walking through the door, and the level of care was profoundly compassionate. The out-of-pocket cost for the consultation and the medication, before insurance even kicked in, was less than what my copay would have been back in the States. The deep, chronic fear that a single medical emergency would bankrupt me and leave me homeless has completely evaporated. But I want to be entirely clear with you, I am not trying to paint a picture of a flawless, romanticized utopia. Vietnam is a developing country, and it requires a significant amount of patience and flexibility. The traffic rules are more like gentle suggestions, and crossing the street is an exercise in faith. The sidewalks are uneven and often crowded with parked motorbikes and tiny plastic chairs. The summer heat can be absolutely brutal, forcing you to adjust your schedule to match the rhythm of the locals, waking up very early, resting in the afternoon, and coming back to life in the evening. Dealing with visa renewals involves navigating foreign bureaucracy, which can be frustrating. You will experience language barriers, you will occasionally get overcharged for a taxi ride until you learn the ropes, and you will have days where you desperately miss the sterile, predictable convenience of an American supermarket. You have to be willing to surrender the illusion of total control. You have to trade predictability for vibrancy. But if you can make that psychological shift, the rewards are immeasurable. What I have gained here cannot be quantified in dollars and cents. I have gained my humanity back. The culture here in Vietnam holds a deep, ingrained reverence for the elderly. Gray hair is not a symbol of obsolescence. It is a badge of respect. When I walk into a cafe, I am greeted with warmth. When I walk through my neighborhood, the children wave to me. I am not judged by the car I drive or the size of my bank account. I am simply a member of the community. My mornings now start with purpose. I wake up to the sound of the city coming alive. I walk to the beach as the sun rises, joining dozens of locals practicing Tai Chi or swimming in the warm ocean. I spend my afternoons reading on my balcony or meeting up with other expats to share stories and advice. I have built a network of friends, both local and foreign, who look out for each other in a way that I hadn't experienced since I was a child. I look back at the 62-year-old man standing in that silent American kitchen, staring at a jar of peanut butter, feeling like his life was essentially over. I wish I could reach back through time and put a hand on his shoulder. I wish I could tell him that the heavy, suffocating isolation he was feeling was not a permanent sentence. I wish I could tell him that the world is so much wider, so much more forgiving, and so much warmer than the four walls of his suburban home. We are constantly sold a narrative that retirement is a finish line, a time to simply fade quietly into the background and conserve your resources until the end. But growth does not stop at 62. The human need for adventure, for deep connection, and for a sense of belonging does not magically disappear just because you stop punching a clock. If you are watching this, and you are feeling trapped by rising costs and shrinking social circles, I want you to know that you still have agency. You have the power to change your environment. Leaving America with limited savings is terrifying, yes. The first few weeks will test your resolve and make you question your sanity. But on the other side of that initial fear is a life of profound peace, dignity, and community. I didn't move to Vietnam to run away from my life. I moved here to finally start living it again. And for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid of the future. I am excited to wake up and see what the day brings. Thank you for letting me share this deeply personal journey with you. If you have ever felt this way, or if you are quietly planning your own escape to a better quality of life, please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I draw so much inspiration from your stories. Take care of yourselves, remember that it is never too late to begin a new chapter, and I will see you in the next video.